And it's so amazing and so cool to have our brothers and sisters from Trinity Baptist Church. I'm just glad that you're here today. So the book of Matthew chapter 25 is where we're at today. The book of Matthew chapter 25. And as you are turning there, so Trinity, your pastor stinks. And he looks like a homeless guy. So he's giving free hugs later on. So before he takes a shower, he would like for you guys to line up and just get these free hugs. All right, Pastor Bill, you're going to have to get that closer, okay? All right. So the book of Matthew chapter 25. And so we had been in this journey of a series of messages, and we're calling this Simple Stories. And we started about a couple weeks ago. Basically, it's the parables of Jesus. And so today we're going to look at a very special parable, one of the parables of Jesus. It's about the sheep and the goats. From the book of Matthew chapter 25, beginning from verse 31. And so let's read that. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Okay? And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will also answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." All this and these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Father, we just want to take a moment to give you praise and glory, for truly you are holy and righteous. You are God. And this morning, Holy Spirit, we just say, we need you. Unless you breathe in us, unless you help us to understand your truth. And I pray that as you allow us to understand it, that we would embrace it. That we would embrace your truth. I pray that it would impact, influence our lives completely. In Jesus' name, and everyone said, Amen. So, You can see in this story that there are three main characters. You got the king, you got, or the shepherd, right? And then you got the righteous and unrighteous, in other words, the sheep and the goats. And so here's the thing about the main character. It's just interesting how you can see that the main idea of this story is separating the sheep from the goats. Okay? This is the main idea of this story, is separating the sheep and the goats. So here's what we're going to see from this passage, that there are two different groups. Two different groups. You got the goats, the unrighteous, on the left of the king or the shepherd, and then you got the sheep, the righteous. Okay? So two different groups. And also it's interesting that they had two different responses. So stay with me for a moment. So there's a need. Okay? There's a need. People were hungry, thirsty, naked, in prison, sick, whatever. Right? So there's a need. And isn't it interesting that they had two different responses? So one group, the goats, didn't care about the needs. They saw the needs, but they did not care. Whereas the other group, which is the sheep group, they saw the need and they cared about the need. They actually did something about the need. They were compelled to be to have compassion towards the needy, and they did something about it. So two different responses to a need.
So this kind of reminds me of I think you probably remember. I'm not sure if he has the right one. I have a different microphone this time.
There we go. You're on.
Okay. So our first night out there, Angelo and I are walking down the street, and you remember that part where we got to Virginia, right? We got to that bridge, and there was a couple of folks off to the side, a couple of men that were sitting down on the side of the building, on the sidewalk, and they were begging for money. And they had long hair, and you remember those two? There was two guys behind us, and we heard what they said. We heard it very clearly as they walked by these guys that were asking for money. Their comment to them was, "Get a haircut and get a job."
That was it. Get a haircut, get a job. That was their response.
And I tapped your pastor on the shoulder and I said, "You know, that used to be me. That used to be my attitude. If you just get a haircut, you just clean yourself up and just go get a job, you're not going to have to just sit on the side of the street and beg for money. Just go get a job and pay your bills and get a place to live just like I do." That used to be me. Going homeless this wasn't the first time for me. I did this about 5 years ago. I lived on the streets of Reno, and it was the middle of March. It was cold, it was freezing, and I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that week opened my eyes. It broke my heart, because I had no idea what those men and women out on the street went through. My attitude was, get a job, cut your hair, not realizing that there's so much more to it. So get a job and cut your hair. Well, let's think about that. I want to go get a job. But in order for me to go get a job, I have to carry my friend with me, this backpack. I say my friend because at the beginning of the week, it started out weighing 27 pounds, but by the end of the week, I promise you it weighed about 200 pounds. I don't dare set it down, because if I do, somebody's going to steal it. Everything that I own is in this bag, and I'm going to have to carry it with me to my interview in order to get a job. And I stink.
Yeah, you do.
I'm not the only one. And I can't go get a shower. So I'm going to go to my job interview sweating, stinking, and I'm dirty. And I can't change clothes because I don't have any clothes to change into. Because the clothes that I had stashed where I sleep, somebody stole them. So I'm going to go to a job interview looking like this, smelling like this, carrying my bag because that's everything I own, and then I'm going to fill out your job application. Oh wait, you're going to ask me my address. What am I going to put down? None. What are my chances of getting a job? None. How quickly we judge. We assume that we know all that person has to do is get a haircut and get a job. That used to be me. And it took a week of experiencing what they experienced to break my heart and understand how prideful and how shameful I was.
So that's one of the problems, right? And so here's another problem. There were 6 things that I was believing God for before I went to the streets. Number 1 is that I would have a deeper understanding of the heart of Jesus for the poor and the needy. Number 2, that I would be able to identify with them. Number 3, that they have value. Number 4, that they have a story. So I'm going to pause for that for a moment. Isn't it so easy for us to just say, cut your hair, get a haircut, get a job, or get a haircut, get a job? It's so easy for us to say that without knowing their story. A couple of days ago, I met this young man who was 24 years old. His name is Polly. And so I began to have a conversation with him, and we were at Starbucks inside the El Dorado just waiting for somebody to kick us out. And so we were there, and then Polly came in, and I started having a conversation with Polly. I asked him, "What's your story, Polly?" This is what Polly said. When I was about 3.5 months old, my meth addict mom didn't want me, and so she opened the garbage bin and threw me in there. For heaven's sake. How in the world could you throw a life as if it was a piece of trash? The person who found him, supposedly a Christian, was very abusive. In fact, one of the things that she would do, she would chain him up down in her basement as if he was an animal. And then they would go to church. And she would do it again, over and over again. So now look at me. How in the world can we say, get a job to Polly? How in the world would we, I just don't get it, how we could say, get a job, buddy, when he's pretty messed up. You don't understand his story. I don't understand his story. How could we? How could we think that it's so easy for Polly just to say, oh, I'm just going to get a job, I'm going to do well in life, when all he had was that? But that's just one of the story we've heard, right? And so isn't it easy for us to just kind of judge people, not realizing that they have a story, that they have a value?
You know what was interesting is in that reading of the passage this morning, there were 2 groups. There was the group that the king had said, you saw me when I was hungry, and you fed me. And you saw me when I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And you saw me when I was in prison, and you visited me. And you saw me when I was hurting, and you offered help. And they were surprised. Did you see that? They were shocked. Because then the king turns to the other group and he says, you saw me when I was hungry and you didn't feed me. You saw me when I was in prison, you didn't visit me. You saw me when I was hurting and you said, get a job, get a haircut. And that group was shocked. And both groups were astonished. King, when did we ever see you hungry? When did we ever see you in prison? When did we ever see you hurting? And he says, you didn't see me. You saw my people. And you didn't care. You told them to get a job and get a haircut. You brought food. You brought water. Both groups were astonished because they didn't see this king. They didn't see their leader. They didn't see this amazing man that they'd always trusted and relied on. He wasn't the one they saw. It was his people.
So, friends, let me just explain to you about the heart of the king from this passage, the heart of the king. It is pretty obvious that the heart of the king is very compassionate, very loving. The fact that he cared for the poor and the needy. Do you know that how many passages that talks about fighting for injustice and really caring for the poor and the needy, being a voice for them? This is the heart of the king. This is the heart of Jesus himself. And it's interesting that while we were having a conversation about this, is that this is one of the most interesting thing that we found. That there is somewhat a connection between our response to the needy and the poor to our eternal destination. Now look at that for a moment, because Jesus talked about, or in the parable, that on the left, the goats, cursed, you're cursed. You are going to eternal fire. And then the righteous said, you cared for them, and you will be with me. Isn't it interesting that there's a connection, and you ask why?
What is that connection?
Right.
What's the difference between this group and this group?
So let me just pause for a moment. We want to make sure that we're clear with this, that we are not saved by our works. Right? Do you all agree?
Yes, sir.
You cannot earn your salvation.
Right.
It is freely given by Jesus, right?
Yes, sir.
And so we're saved by grace, according to the book of Ephesians. Paul is very clear that we are saved by grace. But then, why is acting or actions or our deeds important? Well, let me tell you why. Let me just share that for a little bit. When you and I claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, so there's a process. So if you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, that simply tells us that at one point in your life, you gave your life to Jesus, right? You cannot be a follower without giving your life to Jesus, correct? So you made him your Savior, and supposedly, he's your Lord, right? So if you accepted Christ in your heart, the Bible tells us that you become his followers, right? So if I claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, I'm supposed to have his life living in me, right? The life of Jesus Christ living in me. Well, let's just explain about the life that is in you, that is in me. Well, this life is pretty amazing. Not only that he defeated hell and grave, not only that he is victorious and a life that is freedom, a life of joy and peace, but also think about this, it's a life. His life is full of compassion. His life is full of love, mercy, and grace. And his life would fight for injustice. His life, right, would do whatever it takes to save people. So if we claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, would you not agree that we're supposed to have this life, and therefore we should be compassionate, we should be loving, we should be gracious, we should be merciful, we should be fighting for injustice. And here's the thing, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, and it seems like to me that the Bible is very clear, that if you don't do any of those things, you kind of question, what life do I have? Am I really aware of the life in me? Because the life in me is so loving, it's so compassionate, gracious, merciful, caring, right? Always willing to fight for injustice.
For us at Trinity, remember, the last week before I went out, I preached on a very particular passage. It was a passage that I didn't choose by accident. It was a passage that God gave me, where the Pharisees asked Jesus, Master, what is the great command? You remember what he said? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great command. But then he went on, he said, there's another one. There's another one that's just like it. Love the Lord your God. That's the great command. That's what we are called as Christ followers. Love the Lord your God with everything you are. But the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor is every bit like loving the Lord your God. You cannot love the Lord your God and hate your neighbor. It is impossible. It's in the fruit of the Spirit. The very first element is what? Love.
In 1 John chapter 4, it says, God is love.
Yeah. The key element to all of this has got to be, do we have love? Do we have love for our neighbor as ourself? Do we love the Lord our God and love our neighbor? And that's what we saw is just the lack of love, the lack of concern, the attitude, cut your hair and get a job.
Get a job.
Where's the love in that?
There was, the way we were treated was pretty interesting. I grew up here, so I know a lot of people, and it's kind of funny when they saw me. It's so funny. They'll be like, and so I told my wife about this, and she said, they're probably thinking, honey, that something happened to the church. It closed down. And now you're depressed, and you went back drinking and just getting, drunk and doing drugs because you look like a mess. And so they're probably thinking that.
I want to know something, though, church. How come is it that this man can grow a beard and look good? I try to grow a beard, I look old.
That's why you look like homeless. And so anyway, hey, I didn't know that I'm Asian, just in case you don't know. So I didn't know that I could grow something. My wife would always tell me, honey, shave it. And so never grew anything. And so I didn't know that I could actually grow something. And so I was really surprised.
We saw some real struggles out on the street. We did. We saw pain. We saw violence. We saw anger. I did this 5 years ago. I promise you the streets are much more dangerous now than they were back then. We saw some of the biggest examples of frustration that I can imagine. We saw a man who either hadn't gone to his job that day or had quit his job or for whatever reason he was now unemployed, and he's arguing, and he's almost to the point of becoming physically violent with this young woman who is his, I think, girlfriend and pregnant.
Yep.
And they were screaming at one another until finally they just broke down in sobs.
So one of the things that my experience, I used to be in that environment back in the 90s. And so I got saved 95, and ever since I've lived a very peaceful, blessed life for many years. And then until I went out with you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was so overwhelmed with hopelessness, mental illness, violence, just angry people, constant fights, on and on. I was overwhelmed, and I told my wife, honey, I'm ready to go home. That was Tuesday.
We saw a lot of heartbreak out there, but you also remember we saw some great victories.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, we saw some amazing examples of people.
In the midst of all of this, it was tough and rough. But I tell you, I've been telling everybody, it's really been rewarding.
Yes.
It was tough and hard, and I wouldn't wish this for anybody to go out there and be homeless, because I tell you, it's not something that you would want to do. But it's very rewarding. So tell us about Jasper.
So we're sitting there, and we were praying for a divine appointment. And I was hoping, because I knew this young man. So let me back up. I work at the Reno Sparks Gospel Mission. I don't work, I volunteer there. I teach a chapel class, or I lead a chapel service every Monday morning, and I teach a class to the men and women also on Monday mornings. So I'm down in that area of 4th and Record at the Gospel Mission, and I have been there for about 5 years now. And I remember one young man that I had in my class some time ago, and I knew he had completed the program, and I was really hoping to run into him. And we're sitting there having a cup of coffee, and Angelo and I are talking, and just overwhelmed by the darkness that we're seeing in front of our eyes. And there comes Jasper. I said, "You've got to talk to him. You've got to hear his story." And so I called him over, and Jasper told us about how his life, at one point, he had gone to the mission 2 or 3 times, and each time had given up and walked out because it didn't feel right to him, and he wasn't sure, and he wasn't ready. And he finally, on the 3rd time, he checks himself into the gospel mission. He is so desperate, he's about ready to take his life. And they welcomed him back. They gave him another chance. They didn't walk out on him. They said, "Yeah, come on back. Let's try it again." And he did. And this time, he was ready. And as he told us his story, I just couldn't help but be so incredibly proud. Not proud because I was a part of it, but proud because God moved in that man's life and made him a new creation. The old was gone. That desperation was now replaced with hope. And I'll tell you what, that young man does not know the Lord. He has some questions still, and he probably will for a while. But that reminds me of something that we're all called to know, and that is that we are not the Savior. My years in ministry has taught me 2 things. There is a God, and it's not me. I cannot save that young man. All I can do is be faithful to my calling, and that is to plant those seeds, to point the way to Christ, and allow Him to reap the harvest. This is an opportunity for each of us. It doesn't have to be that you're going to save somebody, because you're not. God will. But you may be His hands, you may be His feet to plant those seeds that at one point are going to grow, and I am convinced that Jasper is coming to know the Lord. And I am convinced that even as God put him there in our path, when I was hoping that Angelo could see him, that wasn't a coincidence. And I told Jasper on the way out, I said, "You know why you're here, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I happened to walk by." I said, "No, God put you here because I had prayed about you."
That's awesome. So here I have another story of victory. So there's my picture and a young man's picture.
Yeah.
And Sebastian. And this is an incredible story. He's been in the program for a couple of months. And when he was 12 years old, his life is just a mess. He started doing drugs. And he was in and out of a mental institution. Imagine, in and out. And this young man, finally, let me just back up. One of the things that he told me, that he is so messed up. One of the weirdest thing his experience was, he would see people just going through walls.
Hallucinating.
Right.
Yeah.
He had lost his mind, just in mental institution, in and out. And then about 4 months ago, he basically went to Reno Sparks Gospel Mission, and now he's in a program. And so how I got connected with him, we were in the chapel, and we were talking to a couple of guys, and here's a young guy, was playing this piano there. And man, he was just playing beautifully. I was like, man, I gotta connect with him. He's just an amazing, incredible, gifted young man.
This guy was playing like Mozart, Beethoven, classical pieces.
It was amazing.
And he was just incredibly perfect.
Right. And then he took this guitar that was there. He started playing this guitar, and I said, man, I gotta go up to him and meet him. And so I came up to him, and I started talking about music and stuff like that. And he told me, and then he began to tell me his story. And the victory about this whole thing is that he's coming to know Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, this young man is not in the mental institution, but he's coming to know Jesus and growing in his relationship with Christ. And I want to tell you today, friends, is that in the midst of darkness, there's this, what we call light and salt. And that's you and me.
That's right.
Because in the midst of hopelessness, there's this group of people, the followers of Christ, and we give hope, don't we? There's a group of people that just says, you know what? I'm so compelled every single day to wake up and fight for injustice. I'm so compelled every single day to do something about this because it's not right. I am a voice because they can't and not allowed to say anything. Friends, let me just ask you this. That all of us are called. If you claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, every single one of us are called to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
That's right.
Every single one of you, every single one of me, of us. And here's the thing. What I do might be different in what you need to do, right? And so we just want to leave you with this application, because what good is a message without an application? So we're going to give you 5 applications that you can apply this week.
But first,
okay,
church, I just want to thank you. I'm going to part with this, but I want to thank you for the heart of this man right here. I've known Angelo for several years now, and this week not only drew us closer together spiritually, but also friendship-wise. As we walk through these dangerous streets together, I got to see more of his heart, more of his desire to serve, and more of his love. And folks, let me tell you, you have an amazing man at the leadership of your church, and a man that you should truly be blessed to know, because I certainly am. And brother, from the very bottom of my heart, thank you.
You're welcome, my brother. Just want to let you know, I actually made a deal with him. I'll give him this $1.69 that I got to say all those things. So we got to tell tell you this story real quick, and then we'll give you the application. Is that okay?
Okay.
So one of those moments, we said, you know what? Let's panhandle. Let's just see, what's going to happen, and we just want to experience it and see how people would respond. And so,
Got my sign.
You got your sign. So show everybody your sign.
Yeah.
All right. Doesn't it? He looked good with that. He looks good. Look at that. Would you give him money? I would. So anyway, so here's what happened. So I decided to go to Whole Foods up south, because I thought, man, you know what? There's a lot of people with money there. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of people
nice
with
cars.
Money.
Nice cars.
There was a Ferrari at one point. So anyway, so I said, I'm going to make some money. Well, not really make some money. Our goal is if we get money, then we'll say, hey, you know what, I appreciate, but we're really pastors and we're in this project that we're doing, and here's your money back. I appreciate it. Give it to somebody that needs it, right? So I was over there, and Bill, where were you?
I was in a little different neighborhood than you were.
Yep.
I was down by the welfare office.
By Burlington.
Right down there by Burlington Coat Factory.
Old Town
where people
Hall.
come out the welfare, and the Job Connect is in there, and people were driving by me and beat up Fords and rusted out Pontiacs and old 60s,
Yeah.
I didn't see any Ferraris.
Yeah, I did. right, listen to this, because there's some hatred here. I hate your pastor. So here's what happened.
We're very competitive, as you can
So
understand.
I said, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to make some money. And so we're in competition of how much we get, And so anyway, so I said, I'm in the best place in Reno. I mean, people with money, they're going to give me money. And so people started driving. I counted 75 cars, 75, that came from the parking lot to the main street of South Virginia, right? And so, well, I had my sign and my depression look, right? It just hoping that they would feel bad. This person just, here's some money, right? They would feel bad. But 75 cars, and this is what I got. You ready? So one guy was driving this pickup truck, and he stopped, and he said, hey, do you want some food? And I said, sure. So then he gave me this open bag of Cheetos. And I was like, thanks for the Cheetos, dude. And so I took that Cheetos with me. And then another guy, so he basically came out to the main streets, and he was driving a really nice Lexus. I mean, he was wearing a tie, suit, everything. He looked good. And so then he decided to come back. So he made a U-turn and came back, and he said, excuse me. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I want to give you this book. It's going to help you. And so then he drove away. And the book was Think and Grow Rich. And I said, man, I'm really doing good. Whew. All right, so then there was 75 cars, right? And then the last person that stopped was a lady driving this beat-up car. And she was like, hey, I don't have anything. And she scooped these coins out of this container, and she gave it to me. And so she said, that's all I have. I hope it helps you. And I was so impacted by that. And she drove away. And now your story, because I'm going somewhere with this.
So I'm at the welfare office. And I'm standing right at the corner of Peckham Street, where people have to turn in to go to the welfare, the Job Connect area. And I'm there for maybe an hour, and it's hot and it's smoky, and I'm standing in the sun, and I'm getting nowhere. Nobody's stopping. Nobody's even acknowledging that I'm there. They're driving within 3 or 4 feet of me, but they just turn their eyes. They didn't want to see me. Well, at one point, there's a little boy. He must have been about 5 years old. He's in the back seat of his parents' car, and as he drives by, he waved at me. Guess what I did? I waved back. And I thought, wait a minute. In just that short time, he engaged me. What if I try waving at cars as they go by? So that's what I did. Every car that goes by, I'm waving at them now. I'm not grumpy. I'm not frowning or looking homeless. I'm smiling. I'm holding my sign, and I'm waving at every car that goes by. About 80% of them wave back. Some of them with just one finger. I don't know what that meant, but I waved at them anyway. But that's when people started acknowledging the fact that I was there. And I had 4 different cars stop and give me money. 3 of them were giving me $5 each, and 1 of them gave me $1. So I beat your pastor by $16, but I wouldn't take their money. I would just give it back to him and say, thank you for your willingness to give, but I'm a pastor. Here's what it's all about. I would explain to him what we're doing, and I'd say, give this money to somebody that needs it,
all right,
because I don't.
This is where my hatred comes in. So he tells me this. He said, I made $16, and I gave it back to them, and I said, I'm a pastor, I'm in this journey, blah, 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 blah. And I was looking at this thing, $1.69, and I said, the lady said, this is all I have, and you can have it. And I said, man, Bill, I didn't give it back to her. And you just made me feel guilty. And I feel so ashamed that I didn't give it back to her. And so, anyway, so that was pretty interesting.
That was.
And so then you came back to Whole Foods because we wanted to switch.
Right.
And see, 75 cars, people with money, didn't. They looked.
Yeah,
Didn't even looked at me at all. They treated as if I did not exist.
And a couple of days later, just Angela was working, trying to get the sermon and the PowerPoints and everything ready. I said, I'm going to go try that spot that you did down at Whole Foods, just to see if maybe because I'm so much better looking than he is, people were giving me money.
You look homeless.
And so I went back to the same spot that he was, and I stood there for about 3 hours. And guess what I got?
Nada.
Nada.
Can you imagine people with money in comparison to people with no money or little money,
Right.
and they were more generous?
It
Is
seems
that
like
interesting?
those that don't have understand what it means
Yeah.
to be without. And
Right.
so they're willing to be more generous. Those that do, sometimes they're like, this is my money. I don't want to give it away. I
Right.
earned it, I keep it, and it's mine. And we all forget sometimes that it's not ours. Whose is it?
Right.
It's God's. It's
So let me give you this quick application for this week, okay? Number one is assess your heart. I really believe, friends, that we should take the time to assess your heart and mind and ask, do I have the heart of the King? Number two, pray. Pray for God to show you His heart towards them. Simply pray. God, just show me. As I had prayed before I started this, I simply said to God, God, give me a deeper understanding of your heart for them.
Yes.
And He did. Number three, ask how God would want you to get involved.
Right.
Just ask Him, how would you want me to get involved? So here's the thing. One of the things I told Pastor Bill is this. We never respond to needs. We don't. We never respond or motivated to respond by what we see needs. But we always respond by the will of the Father.
Right.
What I mean by that is this. If God is working in His life, right, and I come in and be His Savior, here's help because I see the need, but God's saying, that's not my will. I'm working His life. So let me just encourage you that you and I are responsible to ask, Father, how would you want me to get involved? Does that make sense? Because we don't want to respond and be motivated by needs, but simply by the will of the Father.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so we ask how God would want us to get involved, and then step out. Step out. Be a voice, fight for injustice, support and be generous to an organization that helps the poor and the needy, the marginalized. Volunteer, right? Help your church to get to the vision that God has given
That's right.
you and me, right? Because there's so many, as God shows you, you just got to step out and say, come on. And friends, when we were called 6 years ago to the inner city, we didn't know what we were up against with. But I knew that God gave me vision, and I said, God, I'm going to step out in faith. When He said He's going to give me these 2 properties in that apartment, in that land over there, these 2 properties became available, and I just simply said, God, I'm going to step out. We didn't have any money when I signed that papers. 0 money, and I had 3 months, 90 days to come up with $250,000. Where am I going to get that money? But God gave me a vision. Amen. So I stepped out in faith, signed that papers, and then trusted God. And guess what? We were able to raise $268,000 to purchase those 2 properties. Now, God gave me another vision about building a playground. We would need $100,000 to build that playground. We didn't have any money. But we step out in faith because God gave us a vision, right? We stepped out. And guess what? We raised $107,000 to build that playground in 1 day.
Praise God.
And so, friends, what are we saying here? We ask God, how do you want me to get involved? And as God shows you that, you step out in faith. That's what we do. You don't wait for the provision and then you respond to God. Well, God, if you would provide, then I would. Nah, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
God gives you a vision and you say, Father, I'm stepping out and I know you will provide. That's how it works, folks. That's how it works. Any last thoughts?
We have we have come to the end of our week. And I'm going to get reacquainted with my razor very soon, and clean clothes, and my sleep number bed. But, and I know I speak for Pastor Angelo as well, this is not the end of it for us. This is just the beginning. We have looked at this problem from the side of the homeless, but that's just one layer. The more we get into this, the more we realize that there are so many layers involved. There are the sides of the homeless that we have now experienced, but there's also the side of law enforcement. Law enforcement is viewed by the homeless as being the enemy because they're the ones that make them move, or that won't allow them to sleep in the parks. But law enforcement is doing the job that we hired them to do. Amen. Because we as tax-paying citizens want clean and safe streets. And so we talk to our mayor, and our mayor calls the chief of police and says, you know what, Hot August Nights is coming up, and I want those streets clean. And we expect that as citizens. So we want to look at this issue from the side of law enforcement. Men and women, they're just doing their job. They hate making people move like they have to, but they have to, because that's what we as citizens expect. And then there's the side of the business owners. We said the other day that I won't even tell you the condition of the restroom that was used by the homeless person ahead of us, but that poor person at the business had to clean it up, and it was disgusting and it was vile. And it drives their customers away. So from a business standpoint, how do we deal with it? How do we address? How do we help the homeless but still make money? I'm telling you, this is an incredibly complex problem, and it's a problem that we are just beginning to get a grip on. And I hope that we can make some positive changes. Like I said, we will not fight this fight. We cannot win this fight. This is God's fight.
And just my last thoughts about this is that there's affordable housing. Everything is getting so expensive,
right,
because of the growth we are experiencing here. So we were talking with Larry quickly, and Larry was paying $660, and he was getting $700 something every month from SSI.
Yeah, so he had $100 to buy all of his groceries, everything.
And they jack up the price to $880. So he's homeless.
Yeah.
And so what do you do, right? So it is a problem, and what do? We just trust God, and just because there's a problem, we don't say, well, it is what it is. Folks, it is not, it doesn't have to be, it is what it is. You and I can do something about this. And like I said, I am so compelled every single day to wake up and to fight for injustice. And I tell you, do I really want to be out in the streets? Does he want to be out in the streets to be homeless? No. I love my bed, I love my AC, I love my house, and I love my wife's cooking. And that really, and the reason why we did it is simply because it's God's heart.
Yes.
It's the call of God. And so I'm going to ask Pastor Joe to close us, and he wants to pray for the entire congregation, both New Life and Trinity Baptist Church. And then you are released. God bless you guys.
You know, we have an answer to prayer right here. We prayed last week